Tonight's meditation comes to us through some ongoing work that I've been doing, building off of some reflections I've shared in recent weeks in different religious communities on Sunday mornings. And while tonight's reflection does draw from those deep spiritual traditions, it's something that I hope will bring us and invite us into a space of reflection and centering that is accessible for people of all kinds of different backgrounds. If you don't or aren't comfortable using words like God or the sacred or divine, just be open as you listen to this to the ways in which something meaningful, something that is bigger than ourselves, is part of our world, our relationships, our environment, the earth itself. I also want to note that at some points tonight I'm going to be very intentional in some of my language around gender, in speaking about the divine as male or female and some of the stereotypes and rhythms that go with that. This is imperfect. And in part, I use them to draw attention to the ways in which our traditional gendered language and ideology does not always serve us very well. So with that, I invite us to take a moment in silence to center. I'll have some reflection, invite us into a time of gratitude, especially around creation and the earth and nature, and close with another short reflection and some words from an ancient mystic, typical Wednesday night or whenever you might watch this. So please join me for a few moments in silence and centering. I'm not sure what century or decade I'm a child of. I was born in what we would consider to be the late end of Gen X, but before the millennials by a few years. One of my mentors in grad school during our graduation ceremony, this was a program of about 70 or so graduates in a class, so fairly small, but big enough that it wasn't super personal, who was himself a product of the 60s before I was born, laughed, and as he saw me walking up with my long hair and Birkenstocks and tie-dye, said, "Now there's a person who was born before their time." And I find myself adrift in the universe. So I use that to invite us to think about the late 90s musical Rent. It's been popular for a while. It's problematic. It speaks to some particular moments that we are no longer in as a culture or a society. For those that haven't seen it, either the play or the musical or the movie version, it is a complicated and relational and at times radical and at times disappointing story of a group of folks in New York City living with and around in the midst of the AIDS and HIV crisis, a time of a different plague than that which we're most talking about today. And in that, one of the characters, Mark, there's 8 friends that make up the core cast. And there's an amazing party, celebration, comical but political but spiritual feast. And near the end of that, and we may be visited by a cat in the midst of this, Mark shouts out, "The opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation." And somewhat comically, everybody at the table goes, "Ooh." It's a great sound. We're in the midst of a number of struggles right now, and maybe we wouldn't call them wars. I don't want to militarize everything. But we're in the midst of a time in which the political tensions and the health crises have caused us to turn further away than I feel like we have in a while from the environmental and planetary degradation that is such a part of our narrative and our history as a planet right now. Cat, sorry about that. We forget in the midst of the incredibly important work for racial justice and gender justice and economic justice that racism and classism and sexism are part of what makes the burden of environmental injustice, environmental harm, fall disproportionately on those who are on the margins. right now, on this Tuesday night as I'm recording this, we're abuzz as a society with discussion about and hand-wringing and grief and anger and all sorts of really important emotions. What it means that the federal government is placing troops, often unnamed troops, into Portland and threatening to do it to other U.S. cities. This bizarre sense of war being waged on protesters, on those trying to give voice, with a hyperbole that makes it feel as though Portland is on fire across the board, the way that a month ago we were being told that Seattle was a wasteland of anarchists. In the midst of all these struggles, these critical struggles around independence and freedom and justice and race and gender and identity, it feels like we have a hard time in the midst of all of our wars or our struggles in remembering creation. And not creation as a static, distant, disparate part of the world that's not us, but creation as a work, as a journey, as a participation. Now there is a deep sense of myth, I think, in our current context in the United States, 2020, Pacific Northwest. It becomes easy to think of creation as a static thing. We do things to the earth. We do things to repair or heal that stream. Over the past few weeks, speaking in a few different religious communities, I've had some amazing chances on the back and on the basis of scriptures that come through the Revised Common Lectionary to spend some time thinking about the world, the earth, and all that is part of it. Whether it's in the Song of Songs, as the author celebrates the incredible beauty and wonder and diversity of human sexuality and bodies and relationships. Or it's in Isaiah, the prophet, who talks about and uses the imagery of trees clapping their hands in celebration of the sacred. Whether it's in Jacob's dream of angels ascending and descending, connecting heaven and earth through the vision of a ladder. Each of these stories, each of these narratives, texts from Jewish and Christian and often found in other religious and cultural texts, remembers to celebrate that creation is a part of the sacred, not a byproduct, not an afterthought, not a something that's created and put aside. Creation is also inclusive of us. It's not just ours to manage. We're not just here to, maximize product and yield from the animals and the forests and ourselves. That's the myth and the lie of the worst of capitalism. That somehow it's all about what we can create or what we can squeeze out of a world that is much more robust, much more powerful, has much more potential than just as a moneymaker or a way to entrench ourselves as people with power and authority. Creation also is something that is part of our own participation as humans, as people of all genders and races and religions and spiritualities and political stances, participating in the sacred reality that weaves us together to be more than any of us can be individually. This sense of the world, which we might call creation or the place we live, the home, the matrix in which we are enmeshed, the web of luminous light and life. This world is a part of what is good and right in the universe. A shift from some of those thoughts to want to share a short litany, a series of prayers that it would, in other contexts, be done responsively. This is from the community at Iona, which is a Celtic Christian inclusive community that seeks to center itself on the power of the sacred in the world around us. This stretches back throughout early Christian history to the 2nd and 3rd centuries in terms of the Celtic Scottish community, But the roots of Iona go back far beyond that, as a sacred thin space in which the divine in nature and in the world was particularly present to the humans who would venture there. So these words are adapted from their current community that has been writing earth and spirit and justice centered prayer and liturgy for decades now. And I share it not as responsive because of the format, but to invite us into this kind of more formal language. And so participate as is right for your heart and soul. But I hope you hear in these words a different and particular way of affirming the wonderful, the amazing power and presence of that which is sacred in us and around us and through us and despite us in this world that we participate in. God above us, trees, birds, and sunshine, stars and moonlight, God above us. God beneath us, earth, rocks, and rivers, roots and caverns, God beneath us. God around us, seas and winds, mountains and cities, animals and people, God around us. God within us, hope, tears, laughter, God within us. God above us and beneath us, around us and within us. We celebrate that we know your love. We know that you create us as we go. You call us to work and rest and love and live, creating with you. To whatever you name or find as sacred in this world, let us give thanks in silence for beauty. Let us give thanks in silence for those places where we find creativity. Let us give thanks in silence for the places in our lives and our world where we experience abundance. And finally, whether it be folks in our families, in a church or synagogue or other social or spiritual community, at work or at school, extended family around the country or the world, let us give thanks in silence for those with whom we journey in this life. A few closing thoughts coming out of that space of centering, silence, and reflection. When we speak, when many religious traditions in particular speak of God as the creator, or God who creates, or God who created, it's almost always framed as past tense. God is not a clockmaker who builds a cogwheel device of some kind and wandered away. God is not a sculptor who finished their art and left the work to crumble over time, playing with the usual gender stereotypes of Western and American cultures. God is not a man who was in charge and set it up and bosses it around, forcing us into our rhythms and patterns. Nor is God a woman who birthed a universe and loves it but wandered away and lets that universe evolve on its own. I believe that the sacred, if we call that God or the divine or the best of us, whatever that is, that God is creative and creating, not done. The sacred dances in our midst. The divine weaves around and in us and through us and between us. One of my favorite understandings of the idea of calling, of being part of, drawn to work or lifestyle or action or ways of being in this world, is that we are invited to participate in, to create with, to dream, to hope, to vision, to collaborate, to change in our own lives and in the world as a part of that which is sacred. In this long, strange summer, sitting here on a day when it's been in the mid-80s again, and we're tired, we're frustrated, the future is uncertain. Many of us haven't been with those that we care deeply about outside of our own immediate family for months now. Even as we are exhausted by the political wrangling and school and work challenges and economic uncertainty and all the weight that goes with these things and more, my hope for us this night and in whatever comes is that we may find ways for ourselves to create alongside that which is sacred in our world. May we dance with the divine. May we find in ourselves and our connections that spark of newness and possibility and change and potential that we can be part of bringing to life, not alone, not only ours, but ours. The world needs us, I believe. God, as a theist, God needs us. We individually and collectively need to be about that work, that living, that dreaming, that being. I close with some words from Meister Eckhart, one of those great mystical theologians of ages past, whose life and whose teachings are often in consonance with the Celtic tradition that I value so deeply, and the women and men and humans who have sought to proclaim the divine living and reveling in our midst. In translation, Eckhart writes, "Apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. Every single creature is full of God and is a book about God. Every creature is a word of God. If I spent enough time with the tiniest creature, even a caterpillar, I would never have to prepare a sermon, so full of God is every creature." In the day and the week and the weeks ahead, may we relish the mystery of the divine, whether we find that in a solid singular deity, the depth of human love, the work for social justice, the beauty of science and nature, or any of a million other ways. May we relish in that mystery of the divine in and around us. May we always find ways to celebrate and honor the sacred in all the diverse and wonderful ways that we encounter it in our lives. That's what I hope to do for myself, and I hope it for each of you. Take good care. Much love, and good night.